Right now, the earthquake that killed hundreds of people in western Colombia and forced a professional cycling race off the road has just been given an official price tag, and the number is already forcing economists to reach back 3 decades for a comparison. According to Oxford Economics, the direct damage from the quake that struck on August 10th could run between $990 million and $1.9. $8 billion, a figure the firm rounds up to roughly $2 billion once the full range is accounted for. The United States Geological Survey's own worst-case scenario goes much further, estimating the damage could reach as high as 7% of Colombia's entire gross domestic product, or somewhere near $40 billion if the destruction proves more extensive than current estimates suggest. This is the story of what that price tag actually means for a government that was already running one of the widest fiscal deficits of any economy on Earth before the ground ever started shaking, and why economists keep pointing back to a similar earthquake in this exact same region 27 years ago to understand where this is likely headed next. No hype, no exaggeration, just what the numbers say. Drop a comment and tell me if you have been following the recovery since the earthquake first hit. I read every one of these. If you want grounded, sourced coverage of how disasters actually reshape a country's finances, instead of just the headline death toll, subscribe. It is free, and a like helps this reach people who need to see the full picture. Let us go for 5,000 likes on this one. Now let us get into it. To understand the price tag, you first have to understand the scale of what actually happened. A magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck near San Jose del Palmar in Colombia's Choco department at 7:30. 4 in the morning on August 10th, at a depth of about 103 kilometers, and the Colombian Geological Service confirmed it as the largest seismic event recorded in the country so far this century. The death toll climbed steadily in the days that followed, from over 100 confirmed on the first day, past 188 people still listed as missing in the city of Cali, alone within 48 hours, up to 240 within a few days, and ultimately to a confirmed toll of at least 294 people, with more than 3,900 injured and over 300 still unaccounted for. Beyond the human toll, the aid organization CARE reported that more than 45,000 homes were damaged across the country, with 9,215 destroyed outright and 140 buildings collapsed entirely, along with heavy damage to health facilities, schools, and community centers, mostly concentrated in Colombia's so-called coffee axis, a mountainous region that both powers a significant share of the national economy and draws hundreds of thousands of tourists every year. Now to the number everyone is watching. Oxford Economics built its estimate of $990 million to $1.98 billion in direct damage, working out to somewhere between 0.2 and 0.4% of Colombia's GDP, using early USGS. Damage calculations combined with how other economies have historically responded to earthquakes of similar size. A separate estimate from BTG Pactual took a more cautious view just 2 days after the quake, projecting initial spending needs closer to a full 1% of GDP, notably higher than Oxford's baseline. And the USGS's own automated modeling sketches an unusually wide range on top of both of those figures, running anywhere from essentially nothing up to 7% of GDP in a true worst-case scenario, which is precisely why every estimate published in the days immediately following the quake carried the word preliminary attached to it. Tim Hunter, senior Latin America economist at Oxford Economics, said the early numbers point us toward a fairly modest macroeconomic impact overall, arguing that public spending on rescue operations and reconstruction should offset much of the initial drop in private demand. And Oxford Economics has so far kept its broader growth outlook unchanged at 3% for this year and 2.5% for next year. But modest at the national level does not mean the earthquake is cheap, and this is where the fiscal picture gets genuinely complicated. Before the earthquake ever struck, Oxford Economics had already projected Colombia's fiscal deficit at 7.1% of GDP for this year and 5.5% for next year, figures that had already put the country on track for what the Economist had forecast as the third largest fiscal deficit of any economy in the world. Oxford Economics now says it expects to revise those deficit figures upward, specifically because of the reconstruction spending. This earthquake is going to require, even as the firm holds its inflation forecast, steady at 6.2% by the end of this year, and continues to expect Colombia's central bank to hold its benchmark interest rate at 12% when it meets in September. Colombia does have some financial cushioning in place. The country had already lined up $450 million from the World Bank's contingent credit line specifically designed for disasters, worth about 0.1% of GDP, plus access to up to $400 million more through an Inter-American Development Bank contingency facility. But economist Andres Pardo Amezquita, head of macro strategy at XP Investments, was blunt about the limits of that cushion. cautioning that those funds cover only the emergency response phase and that actual reconstruction costs can run far higher than whatever money gets set aside in the first few weeks. That is exactly why economists keep reaching back to 1999, when a magnitude 6 earthquake struck Colombia's coffee-growing region and devastated the city of Armenia, ultimately killing somewhere between 1,000 and 1,230 people, depending on the source, and destroying nearly 2/3 of the buildings in that city alone. That disaster ended up costing an estimated 2.2% of Colombia's entire national GDP and a staggering 35% of the affected region's own regional GDP, with the reconstruction bill accumulating to roughly 1% of national GDP spread out over the following 2 years. To manage that recovery, the Colombian government created a dedicated reconstruction fund for the coffee-growing region. And the way that fund was actually financed tells its own story about how a disaster like this typically gets paid for. 61% of that funding came directly from the national budget. 38% came from external loans through the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and Germany's KfW Development Bank, and just 1% came from donations, despite how much attention charitable giving tends to receive in the immediate aftermath of a disaster like this one. The political response this time has been just as telling as the economic one. President Abelardo de la Espriella, only recently inaugurated when the earthquake struck, initially restricted foreign rescue workers from entering the country before reversing that decision days later and opening the doors to international search and rescue teams. He has since announced an economic emergency and the creation of what his government is calling a miracle fund to help finance the recovery, alongside more targeted relief measures, rental subsidies for displaced families, suspended utility bills, and paused tax filings for households in the hardest hit areas. Pereira declared a car-free day specifically to let search and rescue operations move freely through the city, and canceled its annual harvest festival entirely, redirecting the funds that would have paid for it straight into disaster recovery instead. Private and celebrity response has poured in alongside the government's own measures, and while it will not come close to covering the full reconstruction bill, it does show how far the story has traveled beyond Colombia's own borders. Colombian singer Shakira offered an early message of support for the families affected. FC Barcelona raised more than 100,000 euros in donations and launched a further fundraising campaign of its own. Chef Jose Andres pledged $1 million specifically to help small food businesses that were damaged or destroyed. Soccer star Lamine Yamal and singer Ryan Castro jointly announced they were sending aircraft loaded with humanitarian aid directly into Chaco and Cali. And 2 benefit concerts were organized within days of each other, one in Medellin on August 15th featuring more than 25 artists, and a second the following night in Miami featuring more than 15 more, both raising money for earthquake relief. Even the story that first brought many people's attention to this disaster reached its own final chapter this week. The Vuelta a Colombia, the same cycling race whose 6th stage had to be scrapped because its route ran straight through the earthquake zone, was formally terminated 3 days before its scheduled finish in Medellin, ending after 5 stages and roughly 880 kilometers of racing rather than the full distance originally planned. Diego Camargo, the rider who had been leading the race when it was called off, was declared the winner. So what does all of this actually mean going forward? The honest answer from the economists tracking it is that the headline number, somewhere close to $2 billion in direct damage, is very likely not the final word. Colombia's own experience after 1999 shows how a disaster's true fiscal cost tends to reveal itself slowly, growing well beyond the first estimates as the actual bill for rebuilding homes, schools, hospitals, and roads comes due over the following 1 to 2 years, rather than all at once. If this earthquake follows a similar path, even a contained hit to national economic growth in the short term could still translate into a meaningfully wider fiscal deficit for Colombia over the next several years, layered directly on top of a deficit that was already drawing international attention before the ground ever moved. The gap between Oxford Economics' more modest projection and the USGS's own far larger worst-case scenario is also a genuine reminder of how much uncertainty still surrounds a disaster like this only days after it happened, and why the number attached to a headline like this one is best read as a starting point for the conversation rather than the final accounting of what this earthquake actually cost. The honest, grounded summary is this: a magnitude 7.4 earthquake that killed at least 294 people and damaged or destroyed more than 50,000 homes across western Colombia has now been assigned an initial price tag of somewhere close to $2 billion in direct economic damage, a figure that could still climb dramatically higher depending on how the full reconstruction unfolds. That bill lands on a government already forecast to run one of the largest fiscal deficits on the planet this year, with only a fraction of the likely total cost currently covered by emergency lending from the World Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. Colombia's own history with the 1999 Armenia earthquake suggests the true cost of this. Disaster will not be fully known for years, even as the immediate human response, from rental subsidies and tax relief to benefit concerts and celebrity donations, continues to unfold in real time. We are going to keep tracking this as the reconstruction numbers firm up, sourced the same way we did today, straight from Oxford. Economics, the USGS, and Colombia's own economic officials, not recycled headlines. Subscribe so you do not miss the next update, because based on the pattern this country has lived through before, this price tag is very likely to change. And leave that comment below. Tell me whether you think the Reconstruction Fund should lean more on national spending or international loans, the same debate Colombia had to settle back in 1999. 5,000 likes on this one. Let us go. See you in the next one.